Hello, and welcome back to Out of Print with Ryan Tracy, the YouTube poetry channel in which I read to you my original poems that have never been published. This week, I'm going to talk about the difference between being social and antisocial. This is a topic that is very near and dear to me. As some of you might know that I'm a PhD candidate at the CUNY Graduate Center in the English department, and I'm sorry, English department, if you're watching this and wondering what the hell have we produced. I'm currently writing a dissertation on 4 modernist era writers, Virginia Woolf, Nella Larson, Richard Bruce Nugent, and Mary Ann Moore, the poet, the poetess. The focus of my dissertation is on representations of selfhood in literature during this time period. One of the things I'm particularly interested in is the tension in modernist literature between the explorations of the self, asking what a self is, what does it mean to have a sense of self, have a sense of oneself in the modernist moment, so roughly the 1920s and 30s and 40s. And this question of what is a self is a social question. It's related to social realities, social context, historical context in which writers find themselves. And I'm interested in the ways that modernist era writers, novelists, poets, short story writers, fiction writers, and social critics think about the importance of self-affirmation while also critiquing a Western concept of the self as like unified and whole. My approach to these questions is a body of scholarship that goes by the name of queer theory. I do not have time to go into what exactly queer theory is. It is a queering of theory. It is scholars usually working in literary studies and philosophy and women's and gender studies and sexuality studies, thinking about the word queer in its historical trajectory and how it comes about in the early middle part of the 20th century in English language societies to be identified with queer sexualities specifically. One of the debates that occurred in queer theory or between queer theorists in the late 1990s and the early 2000s centered on the question of sociality and social life and how queerness might name something that is produced by and also challenges the norms of society. And a debate arises about whether or not queerness is inherently antisocial, so defined against society or against belonging to society, or if there's something inherently social, or if there's a desire for sociality inherent in queerness. One of the scholars who took sides in this debate on the side of thinking of queerness as sociality, as an impulse toward relationality, was José Esteban Muñoz. José Muñoz was a professor at New York University in the Department of Performance Studies. He had an unfortunately brief but brilliant career, and his last published work is called Cruising Utopia, the Then and There of Queer Futurity. Cruising Utopia is a beautifully written book of theory, theoretical works, and criticism about art and performance, and in this work, Muñoz is really trying to think of what is it about queerness that makes queers want to gravitate toward each other in a world that is trying to exclude them. And one important aspect of his critique is the way that antisocial queer theory or anti-relational queer theory tends to be promoted by gay white male queer theorists. Muñoz points this out in order to call attention to the way that structural racism in the United States positions queer people differently within social hierarchies. So it might be easier, for instance, for gay white men to take a hardline antisocial position and embrace that, to be against society, to drop out of social responsibility in certain ways, and to say no to the future insofar as the future is supposed to be guaranteed by heterosexual procreation, than it would be for, say, queer people of color or multiply marginalized people who might not benefit from things like male privilege and white privilege, which would provide certain material supports for gay white men. So for Muñoz, holding on to concepts like the future and hope and sociality seems to be necessary for queer people of color. Now, I do not take issue with Muñoz's central point and his desire to draw attention to structural forms of inequality that position different queers differently and produce different needs and desires for them. But I do think the closer you look at specific instances or specific people's lives or literature in particular, the more difficult it becomes to say that anti-relational queer theory is for certain queers and relational queer theory is for other queers. So in my work, I'm interested in thinking through these two valences of queerness hand in hand and together. But I digress. Like any good queer theorist, Muñoz did like to use puns. The title of Cruising Utopia, of course, is a reference to sexual cruising, which I will let you Google that and look it up, but it's fun. And Utopia is Muñoz's reference to the legacy within Western critical traditions of thinking and theorizing utopia. What is the world? What is utopia, the best world for everybody? And while Muñoz aligns himself with the relational side of this debate about queerness, if it's about being antisocial or social, he's also very nuanced in his scholarship, and he absolutely makes a place for thinking of the importance of self-reflection, and particularly in his chapter on aesthetics and art, he 100% understands this sense that queerness is often either about feeling isolated within society and also about wanting to like tell society to go, kiss its own. Muñoz tends to be more nuanced than I think some people read him as, but my scholarship right now is very much informed by his ideas and investments in thinking about queerness as a desire for community and a desire for queer community, while also holding on to the right, and I'm going to use a big Western word there, the right to be alone or assert your individuality and your uniqueness, and to not play along with the reindeer games that have excluded you in the first place. So I'm bringing all of this up because this quarantine, globally and locally, obviously has uneven effects. This quarantine has brought up enormous amounts of questions about what it means to be a social human being and whether or not what we have lost is social contact, or whether or not the quarantine has actually led us to have more and more intense kinds of social contact. I don't know about you, but I am a person who tends to like a lot of alone time. It takes a lot of time alone to do things like write or read or think or do nothing or just have some space in some corner of a house or a room of one's own, as Virginia Woolf would say. And so the quarantine has actually led to situations in which I feel like I actually don't have enough privacy, or I don't have enough alone time. I'm not alone enough. And that produces antisocial emotions in me where I just want to like be alone and tell everyone to go away in a very nice and kind way. And to carve out space for myself to be queer and weird and make videos like this or do nothing, or I don't know. The point is that the quarantine could have an effect not of making you feel less social, but forced to be more social than you may want to be. And yet I completely understand that a lot of people are suffering in this situation and feeling like they have lost important and vital social contacts with friends, with family, with coworkers, with people outside of one's home. So there isn't just one effect that these social distancing and quarantining measures have. And that's more or less my take on the antisocial thesis in queer theory, or the debate within queer theory about whether or not queerness is inherently social or antisocial. In my view, queerness has its antisocial edge as well as its edge for social connection, and those things I don't think can be disarticulated. They go together. And what is interesting to me is to look into literature, and modernist literature in particular, to see how queer writers are dealing with this tension between wanting to get into the streets and start riots and change society through communal or even communist activity, and also demanding or asking for a room of one's own within that process. So the poem I'm going to read to you today is about friends. It's about friends that I have, friends that I enjoy spending time with, friends who have come to my home and partied and celebrated with me, and friends who have invited me to their homes and been gracious and wonderful hosts. It is a miracle to me that friendship exists between humans. It's completely random in a certain way who you meet on the road of life, and it, to me, is absolutely a miracle when complete strangers kind of look at each other and say, hey, you, I like you. Let's spend more time together. Let's see each other. Let's see each other next year. Let's go have a party together. And that is definitely something that has been lost within the quarantine. But it's also, for me, not the answer to then want to be around even my friends all the time. So I actually wrote this poem at the very end of last year, right before all of this happened, right before anyone knew that maybe we wouldn't be able to see each other for a very long time in person. And so there's something, I think, strangely prescient about this poem, but also I think, if I'm to analyze my own poetry, which is maybe your job, but I think it keeps both of these edges of queerness in play. The desire to be around people and to have a sense of belonging to a social world, and also the desire to drop out of that world or have some sense of a boundary between that world and you. So to all of my friends, this goes out to you, and also to anyone who thinks of me and considers me a friend. This is called Last Days of the Year. Known IDs. Call them entities. Friendly names invited to holiday parties. Molly K. Coke, Bloody Mary J, OJ Tito's, Edible Bump, Ketamine Punch, Beer Poppers Joint Jr., Gummy Blow Bourbon the Third, Holy Madonna Mother of G, Fresh Looks for Afternoon Tea, Gold Incandescence and Fur, Somebody Always Says Timely, Let's Go Have a Ciggy, Late Letters, New Nonsense, Radio Gaga, Reindeer Balloon, Raju dancing alone in the afternoon light in our living room. We fling ourselves into no worrisome doom, ciphering a word like disaster in body talk. Said rest. Another spin around the star. That's where you'll find the fairies and their friends are. There you go. That is my poem about friends celebrating together and sort of drifting away into the narcosis of queer sociality. You may have noticed that there are a few references to drugs and alcohol in this poem, and I am not supporting or condoning drug use or alcohol use at all, ever. But sometimes drug use does happen in the world. Drugs, alcohol, which is a drug, and other kinds of drugs have been central to building social bonds throughout the millennia. So we can probably think of intoxication itself as something that keeps society together. But more importantly, it does relate to what José Muñoz writes about queerness as a kind of narcotic drifting away from norms in a direction that brings you into contacts and relationship with other queers and with other people who are not satisfied with the status quo, who are not happy with the present, or who do not find present conditions suitable for life to thrive. So the final chapter of Cruising Utopia is called Take Ecstasy With Me, which is a reference to a magnetic field song, and also an invitation from one queer to another queer, whoever that is, wherever that is, and whenever that is, to join me, join José Muñoz, join other queers in finding each other through the ether and beyond the terms that the present day and the supposed return to normal that it seems to be a very attractive idea to some people in the world right now. I said it the last time, I'm going to say it again. I started this channel because of the coronavirus quarantine, epidemic, pandemic, and I don't mean to not take it seriously. This is just my way of throwing out some joy into the world, throwing out some love into the world. I hope it hits you in a good spot. I hope it finds you in a good place. I hope it uplifts you if you need that. If you like this video, please like the video on YouTube. Please leave comments on YouTube in the comment section, because that helps out the algorithm so other people can find the poetry. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and for those of you who have already liked it or have sent me comments, I really appreciate it. Thank you for your effort. Thank you for watching my videos from beginning to end, because I know that's what you're doing, and I just know that I'm thinking of you as a friend. So thank you for watching. Until next time, bye.